Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of these What I've Been Playing, and as you can see, I recently wrapped up my playthrough of Persona 3 Reload. Had this sitting there for a little while waiting to get to it as I made my way through Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Finally got around to this remake of Persona 3, which has always been my favorite of the Personas. My history of the game is that I played the FES version, so the second release of the game on the PlayStation 2, twice over the years, and then the portable version on the PSP, and was looking forward to this, to not just have the game on a modern console, but to see what changes they made, because sometimes with these, the hope is always that they don't do any real radical changes to a game that I really like, but maybe have some improvements, and that's really what they did here. I was a little torn in the beginning, thinking about during the experience whether or not I preferred this version or going back to the PS2 version. I'll explain a little bit about those differences. And in the end, this version I think won out because I had to ask myself when it came down to it, if I replay the game, which version am I going to grab and pick up and play? And it'll probably be this one. The original version on the PS2 and then the second release with the answer added on and some alterations to gameplay has an interesting feel where, in comparison to this, it feels like some of the changes that they made before getting into the ease of use and the improvements to Tartarus, it feels like there's a little bit of a tonal change in this. Very minimal, but because it's very true to the original overall, but it feels like a lot of the changes are trying to make it feel a little more in line with the tone of Persona 4 and 5, really kind of reaching out to an audience that those were maybe their first experiences, instead of 3, trying to make it a little more unified, because the original version of Persona 3 really obviously gave birth to all the stuff in the stylized fashion and the form of gameplay that was carried into 4 and 5, but it felt also kind of like this transition from the older Persona games, 1 and both versions, Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment for 2, on the PS1, and its roots with the core SMT games, the older ones in that franchise, the transition piece from that into what Persona would be as an individual franchise. And I liked that, and I liked that style, and again, I feel like it changed the tone a little bit more. And here I feel it felt a little lighter, a little easier, not just in terms of difficulty, but in function. I felt a little more in tone stylistically with 4 and 5, a little more unifying there. And I was gravitating towards liking the original version more, really, because of that. I really like games like Nocturne. I liked Persona 3 as that sort of fusion of what Persona was and what SMT was, that sort of in-between piece. But what won me over were two things. One, ease of use. There was great attention to making the management of all the different elements of your schedule, the social links and the new added elements with fleshing out the interactions with your other SEES members and people living in your dormitory, the main characters, and adding stuff like having a part-time job, working on all your different stats, the school day type elements, going through Tartarus. It felt like it was easier to manage all that and pay attention to your schedule, and there was a great ease of use in fast travel elements. The endurance element was downplayed in comparison to the original, and definitely the very first release of Persona 3. There were a lot of things that it felt easier to navigate. It was just a more fluid experience, the physical act of playing through the game. And the biggest change that made this version kind of win over and be my preferred one is the change to Tartarus. Because in the original versions, Tartarus is very much the same on every floor. Like, it feels really, thematically it makes sense, this trip up the 264 floors of Tartarus, working your way up through this dungeon. And again, that tied very much into the feel of a lot of the older games in the franchise, and I enjoyed it, but it could be a little tedious at times. And here, there was far more attention to making the experience of traveling up Tartarus more enjoyable by changing up the look and the theme, the styling of it, roughly every 30 floors or so, depending on where the different blocks were during the different phases of the moon. So that was a huge thing, because you spent a lot of time there, and a lot of time exploring and traveling and training and finding stuff, finding people, doing things to upgrade or fuse different personas. You spend so much time, it's a big portion of the game, that to change it up and have that feel more fun, more dynamic, less tedious, less repetitious, was in itself such a refreshing improvement that by itself, kind of without even considering anything else, would have made this the more enjoyable experience, I think, to go back to a second time. And then you add those ease of play elements that I really enjoyed, where I still love that original version, and I actually prefer it a little bit with, I think, the slight difference in tone between the original and this one. So from that element, I like it, but as far as an overall experience, because gameplay is such a huge part of the experience, I would overall give it to Reload as the one that I will go back to whenever I replay this game. So this, to me, is now my new favorite version of Persona 3. I think it's a great game. If you haven't played it, I know a lot of people, their first Persona was 4 or 5, and maybe have not checked out 3. If you like those games, check this out. Again, they streamlined a lot of things, and they made the experience, I feel, more in line with 4 and 5, so I think you'll really enjoy it. It's still something a little different in comparison to those, and I still think it's the best game so far in the Persona franchise. So, fantastic experience, and I'd love to hear what you thought of the game if you have checked it out.